Welcome to our Building Bridges community conversation with our special guest, Mindy Smith from the University of Cincinnati Corrections Institute. Today, she's going to be talking about the 3 irreducible minimums for increasing successful reentry right now. We are delighted to have Mindy with us today. My name is Reba Collins. I'll be serving as facilitator. Just a few introductory words about Mindy. She received her PhD from the University of Cincinnati and is a senior research associate and deputy director at the Corrections Institute in the School of Criminal Justice at the University of Cincinnati. Whew, a lot of stuff there. Mindy's research interests include the assessment of correctional programs, the science of implementation and knowledge transfer, and more generally, correctional treatment and rehabilitation. She's co-authored several publications, presented nationally and internationally on correctional interventions, and served as a project director for over 200 correctional projects. Her specific topics of research and service include a statewide correctional treatment program evaluation, the development and implementation of cognitive behavior programs for general delinquency, criminality, substance abuse, employment, and sexual offending, as well as recent initiatives to implement effective practices for community supervision and support. All of that I do not quite understand, but I'm sure Mindy will be able to give us some context for her work as she goes through her presentation with us today. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Mindy Smith from the University of Cincinnati.
Thank you, Reba. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's truly an honor that you decided to spend your lunch hour with me. I am very, very appreciative of that, and I hope that we'll enjoy our time together. Reba, you were very, very kind in all of your words there, and what I really hope you guys hear from the kind introduction is that I'm passionate about helping people. That's really why I'm here, really why I want to do these events with Reba, why I come to work every day. It's really about what can we do to help people. And so hopefully I will share something with you that you find helpful today. Hopefully you'll be able to take some information from today and be helpful for others. That's what I ask for, that we can pass it forward. I have come from just a little bit more of a down to earth. The part of working at a university is that they require all these fancy documents and descriptions of things. But the reality of it is I've worked in the system in some way, shape, or form since 1998. I was a juvenile counselor at a residential treatment center. I was a therapist at an adult psychiatric hospital that only served individuals who were in the criminal justice system. I was a therapist with juveniles for several years, and I've been at UC now since, I think it's too many years to count, 15 years, I think. I think this is my 15th year at UC. So my time at UC has been filled with training, with coaching, with delivering interventions next to some of you. I've seen some very familiar faces, which has been nice today. But at the end of the day, it's really about how can we take what we know. I'm very data driven. I have 2 children. They're young, but the one thing they know about their mother is that she wants the evidence. I want the data. I want to know what the research says. And so I try very hard to take that and put it to use. And so hopefully today I can share some things with you that are data driven that again will be useful as you're working with individuals who are returning to our communities here in Ohio. As Reba said, we have the chat function. She's going to be my partner in crime and help monitor that for me. And so please don't hesitate to throw things up as I'm going. We'll pause, discuss, but we'll also save time at the end today, and I'll answer any questions that I possibly can. So to start us off, I want to share that there are 3 major things that I've been asked to talk about. And my goal with these 3 areas is how can I equip you with just some down and dirty strategies that will help you help people as they're coming back into a very different world. Life is different. If people have been incarcerated for a significant period of time here, the world may look very different. So what can we do to really help them? And how can we help them navigate some of those challenges? So as we think about that, I went back to the data and I thought, what data do we have? What data do we not have? And so one of the things I'll be very upfront about is we're still gathering data for what it's like in our pandemic driven world. We don't have all the answers to how we're most effectively delivering services via Zoom or most effectively doing phone check-ins. I mean, things are different and we're still gathering data around those strategies. But what we do have is a wealth of data around what is working when we have an opportunity to interact with people who are involved in the juvenile and criminal justice system. And so rather than throwing everything out and reinventing the wheel and starting over from scratch, what I really want to encourage you all to think about is the data we have that's tried and true, the data we have that's been tested and proven with kids, with adults, with men, with women. And across specialties, people who certainly, tend to be more violent offenders versus your garden varieties. The research has demonstrated that if we focus on those who need our help the most, and we focus on those factors that are directly related to their reoffending in a way that removes any barriers that they have present, but also uses those strong intervention and change strategies, we're going to be able to help them. We're going to be able to help them in a really positive way. And so even though there are some uncertainties around what it's like to deliver groups using Zoom, we know that there are some tried and true approaches generally to working with individuals in the system. And so how do we bring those in and how do we make sure we don't lose sight of those as we're juggling some of these additional pressures from the pandemic and other societal challenges that we're facing today? I also think it's important to acknowledge that the data has been very clear that people are high risk. People need a lot of help because they have a lot of needs. And some of those needs are, sorry about that, I jumped ahead. Some of those needs are directly related to their reoffending, but some of them, I'm sorry, do we have a question? I'm hearing something coming through. No? Okay. Just a quick friendly reminder to use the chat box if you have any questions, but otherwise we'll stay muted until we have some space to unmute. I just want to emphasize on this slide here that individuals who are returning to our communities have a lot of needs. They have a lot of challenges. And regardless of your position, you have the ability to help them with one or some of those needs. And we're going to talk a little bit today about those needs that are most closely related to their reoffending, but also how we help them with those other areas that are really important and can make or break some of our other efforts around those criminogenic needs. It's also really important to highlight that even with these multiple needs, we can help. And Reba and I, those of you that were joining early, Reba and I were connecting about an event she's getting ready to start planning in October. And the idea is about bringing the community together. How can we as a community take part in helping others? And it fits so nicely with the slide. I have to call it out, Reba, because the idea here is that even with multiple needs, we can help. When we come together and whether we're working on the inside with them, we're working on the outside, we're working in both places, when we come together and take a strategic approach that is comprehensive, we can help. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. At a minimum, what are 3 things we can do to be the most helpful we possibly can be? The first thing is, at a minimum, we can focus on those who need our help the most. This is hard. As a self-described helper, whether you want my help sometimes or not, I want to help everyone. The challenge with that is there's often not enough resources to do that. The other challenge is that sometimes we help people who don't really need our help, and we inadvertently cause more problems for them down the line. The criminal and juvenile justice system is kind of notorious for providing more services than we need to intervening more intensely than we should. And so if there's one thing you can think about doing right now, it's focusing on the people who need your help the most. And so if you take a step back, I want you, this is an opportunity for you to use the chat function here. I want you to think about how you can help those who need your help the most and not help others. How do you prioritize your help in such a way that you're focusing on those who have a lot of needs and you're letting go those people who maybe only need a little bit of help? How can you get them to the help they need and then prioritize those people who need a lot of your time? What are some ways you're doing that now? I'd love to have you throw some of those ideas in the chat box. I know you all are experts and I know you're busy. What do you do with those who need your help the most? What are some of the things you do? Oh, is it Kristen? You are a person after my own heart. You use risk assessment tools. Yes, you use data. That absolutely helps you identify what needs matter most for that person. And if that person really needs your help, or if maybe you need to be focusing on another person who might need your help more. That's beautiful. And the adult side, we also have the ORAS. So both of those tools come into play there. Evidence-based interventions. That's right. Those who need your help the most need help using evidence-based interventions. They need strategies that have been proven to work. I love it. Yes, being mindful of your own abilities, Roy. Yes, you have to know what you can and cannot do. You have to match yourself with the people that you can help. And Reba, yes, refer less needs to experts in that area and then take a step back, right? Trust that they're in good hands and they're getting the help in the area they need, but you don't need to keep dabbling and kind of intervening. Let them take the pro-social steps that you know they can take. I love it. That is absolutely 100% in line with some of the ideas I have up here. Fewer programs, less intensive services, only provide services where people need them. If they're low risk, they're not going to need a lot, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay. It frees us up to provide more for those who need more. Less restrictive supervision. I was on a call yesterday with a researcher saying, help me understand why, and I won't share the state, it wasn't Ohio, but it's a close by neighbor. Help me understand why their answer for everything is more restrictive supervision. And they said, I don't know, there isn't data to support that. We really don't need to intensify our supervision efforts, especially for those who are low risk. We need to use our tools like the ORAS and the OES and provide services in those areas and support them through, monitoring and referrals, but certainly not just more supervision. Other things to keep in mind with individuals who don't need our help as much, those who are lower risk, is that they're probably going to do okay without us. And as that self-proclaimed helper again, that's a hard pill to swallow. I want to be able to help. But odds are they're going to be okay because they're low risk, which means they already have those pro-social supports in place. Get them to where they need our help and take a step back. Jump over to this side. Jump over to those who are higher risk and put those structures in place to support them because they need that extra help. They need our monitoring and support up front to motivate them to make those good choices. They need more programs and services to teach them skills, to manage high-risk situations, to first actually be able to anticipate them, to recognize that this is a dangerous situation, then give them the tools to manage it. Maybe even teach them ways to avoid those risky situations. But we want to use those evidence-based practices to help them with that. We want to develop their support network for them. Very often individuals who are high risk don't have a strong pro-social support network, right? You might be it, pending your role. You might be that person. And so how do you help them develop additional supports? How do you build those resources for them? And ultimately, when you're working with people who are high risk with a lot of needs, be ready for mistakes. It's hard to change, right? We all know that, probably personally, we've had our battles, but also the individuals we work with are really battling that. And so it's important to be ready for mistakes and to coach them and help them get back on track when the time comes. And so the first kind of thing we want to think about doing at a minimum is recognizing who's higher risk and therefore who needs our help the most. The research tells us when we focus on those who are higher risk, we have better outcomes. We get a bigger bang for our buck. And so I also like to think about dollars and resources. For a field that generally is under-resourced, lack of funds, lack of time, staff, I want to think about, if I spend my time, where am I going to be most impactful? And at a minimum, that's going to be with your higher risk individuals. The second thing we can do is focus on those criminogenic needs. Each person that you come in contact with needs are different than the person next to them. And so there's a question in the chat box that I think I'm going to hop to real quick before digging into this one a little bit more. So the question says, when developing a whole child transition plan for juveniles returning to school from detention, what do you believe is the #1 service or need they can all benefit from universally? And so I think that this is a tough question. I think it's Nico. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, because everyone is different. And the various assessment tools that are in play in the field should help us understand how they're different. With that being said, there are a core set of criminogenic needs that consistently pop up in the literature around what makes a youth more or less likely to reoffend. As part of that, education is included. What's their educational experience like? Do they have pro-social supports there? Are they receiving rewards from their participation in school, or is it more risky for them? And so I think one of the #1 things that all kids really need is a positive support group. They need people to lean on that are going to help them navigate these risky situations, help them navigate the challenges they may have on getting to school, staying in school once they make it there for the day. So I think ensuring that they have a good, strong support system is really important for kids, while at the same time, you're targeting those literacy needs as well as their juvenile justice needs. So I hope that I've answered that question, and I'll pause here, Nico, if you want to ask a follow-up, or if anyone else does, I'd encourage you to do that. Great. That's one win for the day. So related to those needs, I think it's definitely connected to the second point that I want to make. Kids and adults who are involved in the juvenile justice system have a variety of needs. Some of those needs, as I mentioned, are directly related to their involvement. Those are what we call very fancily criminogenic needs. It's a fun word to say. I love it. It really, truly just means that these are the needs or the dynamic risk factors that are most influencing their likelihood to reoffend. While those needs have been demonstrated through the research to be fairly consistent, each kid brings those needs to the table in a little different way. One of the easiest examples I can share about that is thinking about substance use. A lot of kids have substance use needs. Sometimes it's alcohol. Sometimes it's alcohol and marijuana. Sometimes it's alcohol, marijuana, and cocaine, meth, right? Heroin. It can be a variety of different needs. Someone who is battling addiction with heroin is much different than someone who has an alcohol problem. And so we're going to have to recognize that those, while it's a substance use need, it's a little different. And how we might want to target that needs to be individualized to that person. The other really good example I think about is family. A lot of times people have challenges within their family. With kids, sometimes it's boundaries and rule setting and authority situations at home with their parents. Sometimes on the adult side, it's the same. Sometimes it's much more conflictual and presents itself in a different way. And so while these needs are similar, we really want to individualize our services to each person to make sure we're only targeting the needs that they have in a way that best matches their needs. So let's talk a little bit more about these criminogenic needs. These are kind of the central 8. These are the data-driven risk factors that consistently appear in the research around what makes someone more likely or less likely to reoffend. So if someone has thoughts, attitudes, values, or beliefs around their behavior, it will influence their behavior. So for example, sticking on kind of the school factor, if I think school is important, you better believe I'm going to get my butt up and go to school. If I think school doesn't matter and isn't going to help me at all, I'm going to have a hard time waking up in the morning. If I think work is important and I value work, similar, I'm going to get my butt up and make it to work on time. If I think working is for chumps and I can make way more money standing on the corner, then that's what I'm going to do. My attitudes, values, and beliefs will drive my behavior. The same thing with my peer group. Birds of a feather flock together, right? We're all familiar with that saying. We tend to hang around people who are most like us. That matters. That influences our behavior because our friends, our peers, our associates are models for us. They're showing us behavior. And so when we think about how we can help individuals by targeting these needs, we can help them recognize their thinking. We can help them recognize their peer group and assess, are these people likely to keep me out of trouble? Are these people likely to increase my chances of getting into trouble? Right? Am I someone who tends to fly off the handle really quickly and get in a lot of fights? Or am I someone who tends to be able to keep my control? Do I like to kind of seek out adrenaline rushing situations? Do I tend to act impulsively? Those fall into the personality patterns. If we can recognize these criminogenic needs or these risk factors in individuals, we can help them manage them. We can teach them ways to anticipate why these are risky for them and teach them the skills to handle them differently. And so when we think about kind of bottom line, what can we do to help returning citizens? We can focus on these items right here. These are important. We also have to recognize there are other barriers. Yes, Reba, I see your comment here. The relationships within these criminogenic needs and how they influence self-efficacy and their perception of who they are really matters. And how can we help them start to see themselves as someone who leads a pro-social lifestyle, who does go to work, who holds down a job, who is, maybe going to school, whether it's night school or, still more in the K through 12 realm. But how do we help them take on that new role as they're returning to the community? It might be very different for them. One of the ways we can do that is we want to make sure that 80% of our time and energy with those high risk, high need individuals, we're focusing on those criminogenic needs that I just had up on the screen. So when you think about the time you spend with someone, whether it's 5 minutes, 20 minutes, once a week, a couple times a month, is 80% of that time focusing on those major criminogenic need areas? If so, you're likely making an impact in that area. That's important. But this 20% really matters. So I want to talk about that next. At a minimum, we need to make sure we are recognizing that each person we're helping is different than the next or the last. That each person has their own personal characteristics, their own learning styles, their own barriers, their own baggage, sometimes people refer to it as, that they're bringing to the environment and to the situation. And how do we best address that and work within those constraints and minimize those barriers so that we can use effective strategies to target those 80% kind of interventions. So if you think about what's up on the slide here, a really nice way to think about this is, let me get my trusty pen. This part right here, let me try my pen again. Yes, this part right here, where we're matching individuals to interventions and staff based on those key personal characteristics, that's your 20%. What barriers do I have to remove? What programs will they benefit best from? How do I match based upon this specific person's learning style and their needs, their motivation? This second piece right here is more general. We know that justice-involved individuals respond well when we use strategies that are rooted in cognitive theories, behavioral theories, and social learning theories. And I'm going to pick through those a little bit just so you can see what they are. I suspect many of you are relying on a lot of those theories yourself in your interaction. So we'll take a look at all this here in more detail. But some of those barriers, some of the important learning components and challenges that people bring to any event or any interaction are the next two kind of slide focuses. And these are the first set of ideas I have up here are some of those external barriers, things that are very, very challenging for some individuals who are returning. Very oftentimes they don't have transportation. They've got a long list of mandates of things they have to do for their PO or for their program, but how are they going to get there? They don't have any transportation. That's a challenge. How can we help with that? Childcare. Who's going to watch their children? Sometimes it's even much bigger than that. They don't have a place to live. Without a place to live, you can believe they're going to prioritize finding a place to live over attending a treatment group. We got to have those basics of safety and a sense of security. And so these barriers can really interfere with our ability to be helpful, with someone else's ability to navigate this new world they're returning to. So at a minimum, how can you help them with these areas? How can we help them find transportation, find childcare, find a place to live? How can we connect them with a healthcare provider to address their physical health concerns? What are those strategies you can do to help them navigate some of the system-created barriers that are present? And at the same time, how can you address some of these individual barriers? How can you build their motivation to make good choices? How can you build their motivation to handle risky situations in a positive way? How can you help them stay in line with their mental health treatment plan? If they're transitioning to the community with a plan in place, with a provider to go to, how can you help them stay committed to that? How many of you, just if you can use your raise your hand function, how many of you have, oops, didn't mean to draw a line there. How many of you have had interactions with individuals that have said, I quit taking my medication. I can't get my refill. I lost my medication and I'm not ready for a refill for another 30 days. I don't like the way it's making me feel. Just, yeah, raise your hands. Absolutely. These are real life challenges that make the next part more difficult than ever. Because if people are battling these internal barriers, how then do we say, okay, well, we're going to send you to a treatment group where they're going to help you recognize your risky thinking and change that risky thinking? How can we do that? If someone suffers from anxiety, which is often coupled with OCD and some of those other mental health issues, how do you send them to a group environment to learn how to anticipate risky situations and manage them differently? How do you do that in a way where they're going to be successful? It's possible. I'm asking a lot of hows. I'm going to pause here and say that it's doable. I see Daryl's questions around how do you match individuals to staff and interventions. You use assessments. So you have the OYAS, you have the ORAS. There are also more specialized assessment tools that will help you identify what types of programs and people work well together. So for example, when I worked at a residential center for juveniles, one of my primary responsibilities was to conduct one-on-one counseling sessions while also facilitating cognitive behavioral groups. There were 4 or 5 of us in our department who were responsible for these things. Our supervisor administered assessment tools to us to figure out who we worked well with. And then we assessed the kids to figure out their learning personalities and their styles that they responded well to. And I did really well with young and immature kids. I must have very good patience, not to toot my own horn, but there were some trying times in there with those young kids, high ADHD rates, bouncing off the walls because they're kids anyway, but add some other things to it, right? I worked well with those kids. So I did a lot of one-on-one with that population, a lot of facilitation of groups with that population. My colleague, on the other hand, has zip, zero, zilch patience, and she would let me say that today. She could not last in that group. She'd pulling her hair out. She worked well with the more calm, antisocial older kids. That was her group. She could handle their antisocial attitudes and values. She could be firm, she could be fair, but she could help them recognize those risky thoughts really well. Not that she couldn't work with the kids I could work with, and not that I couldn't work with those older kids. We just were better matched in that way. And so using the assessments allowed our supervisor to match us to the people we worked best with and who worked best with us. So assessments are really, really helpful. The one thing that does not work well is allowing the kids or the adults in the program to pick who they work with, right? They think they know who they want because they think she's easy or lighter or he lets everybody off earlier, right? It's usually for all the wrong reasons. So we don't want it to be participant-led or, the justice-involved individual-led. We really want it to be data-driven in that regard and purposeful in the matching of things. Because when we get to the program where we're using our skills that we have and we're able to really help them recognize their thinking, pay attention to their thinking, we want them to get the most out of that intervention possible. Because one thing that the cognitive theories have taught us is that our thinking drives our behavior. You guys know this. I'm not going to dwell on this fact, but I'll just say really simply, if you've ever tried to eat healthier, when you say to yourself, it's okay to have that cheesecake or that chocolate muffin or whatever it is that you want, you're going to eat that cheesecake and that chocolate muffin. I can tell you that because your thinking says it's okay. But if your thinking says, no, Mindy, you are working really hard. You've made it 3 days. You're on track. Don't do it. You're not going to eat that cheesecake. Our thinking drives our behavior. So we need interventions that help people recognize their behavior. So when you have a chance to sit down with someone, pay attention to their thinking. Help them pay attention to their thinking because that's what's driving their behavior. My favorite question to ask people is, what did you say to yourself before you blank? Plug in any action because that was the most powerful driver behind the behavior. Other things you can do to be helpful is practice with people. Help them anticipate those difficult situations and practice them with you before they even happen. Help them redo situations that have happened that didn't work out well. So if they come to you and say, I bombed, I got drunk last night, then go back and say, what happened right before you made the decision to drink? Tell me what you said to yourself. Tell me what you did. Now let's practice it differently. Let's try a different approach. Let's say something different to yourself. Let's use one of those skills you learned in such and such program. Rely on what they've already learned. Repeat it. Practice it with them. We all know that practice helps us learn. I'm not a fan of practice makes perfect because I don't believe perfection is possible, but I do believe practice helps us get closer. And so when you've got the time to reinforce things they've already learned, try things out with them, help them practice, that's where we can be really helpful. That's where we can help them be better in the future. The other idea that I want to share with you all today is that research has identified, I love practice creates progress, by the way, I love that. One of the other things that research has proven is so helpful when working with a justice involved population, whether inside, outside, returning, been out for a while, is a set of core correctional practices. And they're up here on the slide. If you want, I don't have time today to dig into these, but if you want more information, you can go to our website or you can shoot me an email. Reba's got all my contact information. I think I'll put it up here at the end. I would be happy to talk more with you when you have these in your toolkit, meaning you're able to establish a strong relationship, which I expect you have in your toolkit. You're able to praise them for making good choices. You're able to help them recognize the dangers of a bad choice, of a choice that was risky or that ultimately resulted in them getting into trouble again. When you're able to help point those options out ahead of time, model for them pro-social choices, help them recognize their thinking. When you're able to do all of these things, again, outcomes in the evaluation research are better, they're positive. And so if you can seek out training opportunities to develop these tools for yourself, you're going to be a better agent of change. The data consistently shows that. And it goes so far as to say, while they're called core correctional practices, these practices are actually popular when you're working with any type of involuntary population. So it's not just CJ, it's individuals in the welfare system, individuals who are suffering from mental illness, individuals who are repeat customers at the hospital for physical problems that they're not motivated to truly treat, but they keep finding themselves in need of immediate attention. These strategies help. And so if you can equip yourself with any of these that you don't already have, you can be a more powerful agent of change. And so that's my 3 irreducible minimums. If you can possibly focus on those who need your help the most, prioritize those criminogenic needs while not neglecting those real barriers that they have as they're returning into this very different pandemic world. And if you can do so using these research-proven strategies, focusing on their thinking, the importance of practicing how to handle those situations, you're going to be an amazing agent of change. And I suspect if you would be willing to do a little bit of reflection today, and feel free to use the chat to do that, you're using a lot of these strategies. I would love for you to share which ones you consistently try and maybe which ones you'd like to add to your bag, add to your toolkit, and start to bring kind of more into regular practice for yourselves. And I'll also pause for more questions.
So Mindy, we have about 15 minutes. Are you open to taking some verbal questions and conversation?
Absolutely.
All right. So we will open up the floor, so to speak, for questions or conversation. I love that last question you ask us to reflect on, right? Is, you know, I think oftentimes we get into just the practice of what we're doing and we don't really evaluate, step back and reflect on why was one level of engagement effective and why was another one not so effective. And, you know, consistency across each person is different, but our consistency is really important. So
that is well said.
thank you. Anyone have any questions for Mindy or thoughts? You can turn back on your videos too if you want.
Yes, please.
Wow. You must have covered it all.
I can't believe that. but I understand sometimes questions on the spot are difficult.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hi, Mindy. This is Daryl. So thank you for your presentation today. I do have one question I'd like to think a little bit more deeply about. I asked it already in the chat about the idea of matching individuals to program providers inside the prisons, inside the correctional facility. So clearly, we have a limited number of staff, and we have a lot of folks who need programming. We prioritize, we use ORAS, and we prioritize their reentry plans based on that. But so I just like a little bit more insight into, you're familiar, I think, with some of the practices that we have in place. So any other insight on some things that maybe we are not doing that may be doable in that setting in terms of the kind of matching folks with interventions and staff?
Yes, absolutely. And I actually think, Daryl, COVID may make some of this matching easier for you all, because my understanding is that right now, folks are not moving out of their locations for group. Like if whatever housing unit they're in there for their interventions right now. And so the staff, you've got different staff running groups than maybe you would have pre-COVID. Is that true?
Obviously, I'm not inside the institutions, but I know they are mostly still operating in cohorts.
Yes.
So the program is limited, yes, to folks who are in those cohorts and the staff that are already in those areas who are able to provide programming, notwithstanding whatever we're able to do virtually.
Yeah. So one of the things that you guys might want to think about doing is ensuring, and this takes time. So let me, before I give any specific ideas, let me acknowledge that this is a training need, this is a coaching need, this is an assessment need, this is a scheduling need. My recommendations will cut across a variety of pieces within your system. And so I do not want to present anything as like just flip the switch, Daryl, this is easy, because it's going to require change in a couple of different ways. So I want to honor and acknowledge that. But I also want to give some very specific ideas for you to start sharing and thinking about as you kind of consider this idea more. One is taking a look to ensure that you have your staff assessed and matched based on their skills. So when you think about all the different services that you have available through your group interventions, are some of your staff better equipped to handle the structured CBT groups compared to some of the other more process-driven groups? Some staff are naturally more skilled at a process-driven group compared to a structured CBT group. And so maybe looking at some of those components would be helpful, and then assigning staff accordingly. Certainly looking at who's trained in what matters right now, who's an expert in something over who's not, that's important. I think if you can cluster your staff, so you've got a handful of staff who are good within each pocket of offering, then you can take it to another layer and say, okay, who's good with the guys who aren't motivated? Maybe they can serve a group of, the pre-treatment, the guys who need more motivation than those who are motivated to change and ready to hit the ground running. And so you can consider separating facilitators and inmates by some of those specialized areas, such as motivation. Some of your individuals, I'm not sure how you run an SOP programming right now, but some staff are better suited to working with sex offenders than others, and a quick assessment could help you determine that. So matching people in that way might be helpful. Sometimes cultural and gender, ethnicity, some of those things that make us feel uncomfortable to talk about really make a difference in a group. I have had individuals who refuse to work with me because I'm a woman, because I'm a white woman. And rather than forcing me to be the group facilitator, it was a barrier to their learning. We created groups that were better matched to some of those tougher individuals who held some very strong beliefs. And that's hard because I think people's inclination sometimes, not always, but sometimes is they got to learn, they got to figure this out. They got to learn to work with a white woman, right? And so then we force them to be in the group, but it becomes a constant battle and they're not learning the group content. And so how do we address that barrier around ethnicity and gender and culture outside of the group that's designed to target their substance use needs, for example? And so it's not ignoring it, it's picking and choosing when. And so sometimes it's important to have those assessments in place to identify our own personal biases as a facilitator, as well as for the inmates who are coming into the group and making sure that we're matching in a way that is best for everyone. And then also simultaneously, maybe addressing and helping resolve some of those biases that a person may have. Maybe I'll pause there. Those were some of the ideas. The core, Daryl, at all of that is having good assessments in place to help you determine people's strengths and weaknesses. And then also making sure that you've got training and other supports in place to help people navigate those weaknesses and enhance them while also doing the matching piece around that.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in and say for community folk who are not going inside and maybe don't even have an official role of individuals, it's really important for us to know ourselves as well, right? And to assess ourselves and you mentioned, cultural biases and all of those kind of things, because we can be very harmful if we think we need to help somebody that we just honestly have real issues with, right? And so I think that's for us out here that are doing ministry and volunteering, we need to know ourselves a little bit better. So that we can intersect and connect with people and see them, for who they are as opposed to who we think they are through our own lens.
Discovering our own personal biases, intentional, unintentional, is critical to be an effective change agent.
Any other questions or discussion?
Yes. Thank you, Mindy. I really appreciate your presentation. One of the things, because this is not necessarily something that you're going to be able to answer, but definitely because it's centuries and centuries and generations, so there's not going to be a way for you to be able to answer this. But when we're thinking about, especially when we're talking about juveniles, and we're talking about barriers, theoretically, yes, we know that transportation, childcare, homelessness, and financial stability makes a difference. But when we're talking about our youth, which we have predominantly our youth are African American, and we're running against systemic issues where there are lack of because of divestments in the community. How do you see that how do you overcome that to be able to assist? Because these are, yes, theoretically that works, but in practice, how do we get them to that spot? Yes, we can talk about matching, we can talk about risk needs, but when we are talking about true barriers and being able to navigate this space, and we're talking about juveniles who sometimes don't have that parental and those protective factors to be able to help them when they come home. How do we overcome that? Because if that is going to be a barrier, that is going to be a barrier until we begin to move things in society to allow for equal access to education, to allow for equal opportunities for employment. And we also have that added factor of youth. A lot of employers don't want to deal with that 16 to 18 age to employ them. So are there some ways in which we in the community can begin to rally around these issues to make some of these barriers less, let's say, making the barriers a less a daunting task to overcome, if you will. I'm not saying to remove them because that's going to take some serious systemic overhaul, but how do we lessen, if you will? If you can answer that in 5 minutes.
I can, because I think you answered it. I think that you have the vision in your question. You said, how do we do this? How do we overcome? There's a lot of we in there, and it's leaning into our community. It's motivating and mobilizing. I tried to combine those two, but it's motivating and mobilizing our community partners to create the resources that they need. And so when I think about being in the community, and I live here in Cincinnati, and I had a wonderful call with the Green Light Foundation the other day. And I think this is what we need to do. Our community partners need to connect more. We need to bring, I often feel like, let me take a step back and just share a reflection, but I often feel like we attempt to solve problems in a vacuum or through isolated means. And I think that's kind of how we've gotten to where we are right now. I think when we come together and we all lean in and we look at this as a community problem, then we're going to find community solutions. And so I think it's knocking on our neighbor's door saying, look, you have a transportation service. How can we get you to help us in this area over here with this problem we have? Would you like to be part of our community solution? And that's a lot of door knocking, and it's a lot of educating our partners about how wonderful these children are and how everyone deserves a second chance and deserves the help. But it's leaning in and coming together. And that's going to take time. But I think we'll have all victories that will allow us to help with those immediate kind of more needs. But I think, I would be a fool to say any of this is a quick solution, that it is bigger. The cop-out answer, I'll tell you, is write grants. Seek funding for transportation services to provide it yourself. Seek funding for gift cards to help them with food and clothing resources. And those are important and helpful, but to me, that's just not enough. That's falling way too short. That's just an immediate Band-Aid versus looking to really lean on our community and set some expectations that we're all part of the change.
Thank you for saying that about the grants, because I think we often lead from that position, right? That, oh, we need the funding to do it before we can actually do it. But that then exports the responsibility of doing it to an outside source, the funder, right? So we do have all that we need in our communities to solve this. But as both you and Kristen said, it's coming together and recognizing first that this is a driving force into this cycle, right? And into the systems that have trapped so many people. So the solutions, practicing them, it's hard work, but we need to labor. We have to labor, right? Justice is going to cost us.
Yes, nothing.
In one way or another, it's going to cost us money to incarcerate more and more, or it's going to cost us to invest in the communities to get them healthy again. And that's going to take over investment, because just like, an old car that's broken down, right? It's easier to maintain that car so it doesn't break down. It takes less time, less money and all that than to go and restore something that has been neglected and abused for so long.
That's such a pointed analogy and couldn't be more true. And so it's the hard work that many of you are choosing to take on and do by being here today, by investing in your communities.
All right, we are at time. So if you have other questions for Mindy, because I'm a processor, I like to walk away, think about it, and then come back with really deep questions. So if you're one of those, just reach out and I can provide you Mindy's contact information as well. And again, just remind you that these are the things that we are going to be tackling at the community experience in October 14th, 15th, maybe even on Saturday the 16th, where we really dig in to how each community member can start to do this work, like Kirsten and Mindy talked about. So thank you for attending. Thank you for being here. Appreciate all of you, everybody, all the work you do. Thank you, Mindy, for giving of your time and your expertise in equipping us on a nice Friday afternoon. So thanks so much, and have a blessed weekend and a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And thank you.
Reba, will the slides be available